trying to figure out ultimately what is.
It's still a mystery as to why it took them. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of Primetime Crime. I'm Lauren Conlon, one of your hosts, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Jarrett Ferrantino. Hey, Jarrett.
Hey, Lauren. Hey, everyone.
So we have a really lovely, special, amazing guest today. You guys know her. She is the multiple Emmy Award winning Ana Garcia. She hosts the hugely successful true crime news show on TV now and the podcast, which is daily. And the YouTube channel to True Crime News has over 3 billion views and over 5 million subscribers.
Wow.
Something that we would love to hit one day, Jarrett. But yeah, we're getting there. No, but Ana is incredible. You've seen her on 2020. You've seen her on Dateline, Lifetime, ID, HLN, and Oxygen. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to bring her in right now. Ana, how are you?
Well, Lauren and Jared, it is lovely to see you again. I had the privilege of meeting you in person.
That was a really fun night, and that was a wonderful, wonderful launch. You should be so proud. It was so much fun, and the people there were just, gosh, they were all original gangsters in basically true crime. I was so impressed.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. We're really happy that you could join us.
So I want to just dive right in, Ana. I want to ask you, first of all, because Jarrett and I, we love to discuss stuff like this, but has there ever been a case that you have covered, cold case, missing case, anything that has really just stuck with you after hours and it still sticks with you today?
I think so. I think a lot of cases actually do. You know, it's very hard when you meet someone who has lost a loved one or perhaps someone who has been severely and permanently injured by the crime that was committed upon them. And it's very hard, you know, not to have a personal connection to those cases.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I was just curious if there was just one specific that maybe our audience would know about, or one that we could look into and research after that really stuck with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's the case of Mike Williams who went duck hunting one morning and he never came back, and it was ruled that he had fallen into a lake in Tallahassee and had been eaten by alligators, which sounds extraordinary and almost impossible to believe. And his case was cold for nearly 2 decades, and his mother never believed the story. She never believed that that was possible, especially since she learned that alligators don't feed when it's exceptionally cold, and there was a winter storm that was blowing in. And he was also supposed to go on a romantic getaway with his wife at the time. So the years pass, and no one is really following up on the case. It's considered, you know, a cold case, and his mother would stand in the middle of the street holding homemade signs, trying to get attention. She would write to the governor. She would take ads in the local paper. And as the years went by, the widow ends up marrying, Mike Williams' best friend. So that's kind of weird. Your best friend and your widow marry, like, that's not suspicious. And the widow tried to get the husband declared dead within 30 days of this accident, disappearance, whatever you want to call it at the time. And state investigators, insurance investigators, did look into it because she claimed insurance money. So and by the way, the best friend wrote those insurance policies.
Wow.
So it's hard to imagine, right, that could go cold for so long. So many red flags were there. And then we covered the story and, kind of upset people by being back in town, trying to question the widow, trying to question the best friend. And then everything just fell apart, literally just within weeks of our being there. And it seemed that the widow was no longer interested in being married to the best friend. And the best friend didn't like that. So he kidnapped her because he said on the stand she wouldn't listen to him. So of course, if you kidnap him, then maybe she will listen to you. I mean, these are the insane things that are literally said on the stand. And so,
What?
yeah, as part of his deal on the kidnapping charge, he decided to tell the authorities where Mike Williams was buried in exchange for immunity. And so he got immunity from prosecution on the murder, but he was sentenced to 25 years in prison for the kidnapping. And had it not been for his confession, they would have never found Mike Williams' body, and they did. And so then they charged the wife. They did not charge the boyfriend, best friend, husband, whatever you want to call this guy. Yeah, so it's, it's a case that really always makes me think that almost anything is possible. That if you give up hope, you will never find answers. But if you can hold on to that hope, then maybe like the Mike Williams case, the mother can finally have some answers. And I know that was a really long story, but that's,
Well,
I mean, that's,
Anna, a couple of things. Number one, I had a case where they blamed the alligators too, and it turned out it was not the alligators, ironically enough. So, but the one thing I want to say that I take away from that is the attention and the pressure some of the work you do brings to bear on a suspect or a cold case. It's really important. And people can't, I've had defendants say, I wish the media would just go away, or I wish they would just forget about this case. In cases I've actually prosecuted that went cold or were getting close to it. So, I mean, the fact that you brought attention to that case is really a tribute to your work. And it just goes to show you that you're not only reporting on crime, sometimes reporting on crime, although these cases are compelling, has a collateral benefit. It brings attention. It gets people talking. And sometimes the journalists and the media make defendants even more nervous than law enforcement. So that's really a compliment to your work. And I think there's more cases to come now with your show getting the attention it's getting and the views it's getting.
I think you're right, Jared. I think that attention, they want the attention to go away. And that was very, very much in play in this case because the widow was angry with her mother-in-law, with Mike Williams' mother, Cheryl, because she kept putting the pressure and sought out media help and attention for the case. And the mother testified on the stand that she was threatened, that they had a child together. So Mike Williams, who was later found dead, and his then wife, Denise, they had a little girl together. And the widow told Mike's mom that if she insisted on getting media attention and pursuing this with the cops, that she would withdraw and not permit access to the granddaughter. And that's exactly what happened. And when Cheryl Williams told that story on the stand during the murder trial, because I was in the courtroom, you could just see the jurors, how upset they became, because it was like one more piece of evidence. Like, why would anyone deny a child their grandmother, especially from, a parent who has disappeared, who was not in her life? So it was a very, Cheryl Williams has paid a huge price, both in the loss of her son murdered, and then she has no relationship with her granddaughter.
Some of the work, so she robbed, the defendant robbed Cheryl of her son and grandchild, essentially. So it was like she couldn't do more damage to her. There's one of the things, and maybe you find this to be the case, but there's always a mother in these cases that doesn't give up. I mean, I can't tell you, and over the course of my career, and I've been prosecuting for 20 years, it's those cases where a mom is left to pick up the pieces. And certainly I represented Don Drexel in the Brittany Drexel case. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one. That was out of South Carolina, spring break, a 17-year-old young girl that went missing. It's the power of those left behind too. And to get the opportunity to work with those folks, Have you had an opportunity to meet a lot of victims' families? Have you had really does it change your perspective in the work you're doing when things get personal like that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you feel a responsibility to the family. And, when I first met Cheryl Williams, she said to me, everybody thinks that I'm crazy. And I said to her, I don't think you're crazy at all. You're demanding some very reasonable answers to really reasonable questions. Things just don't add up. I do believe if she hadn't given up, we may not. Excuse me, if she had given up, we may not know what happened to Mike Williams. But she didn't give up. And I do believe that it's either a parent, a loved one, a child, a spouse, a sibling who believes so strongly that they refuse. You can't give up because the system is overwhelmed, the criminal justice system. And once we figured out where Mike was buried in a completely different lake. And the accident had happened on one lake. And then Brian Williams, this was the best friend who then ends up marrying Mike's wife. Um, he testified how he tried to push Mike into the water and had hoped that he would drown with his waders on. But when he wasn't drowning, he had to shoot Mike. And then he fished his body
God.
out of the lake, put him in the boat, removed him from the boat, put him in the flatbed of his truck, then is driving around town, actually goes home. Brian Winchester testified he goes home. Poor Mike is still in the back of his truck because he had to get there just in time for his wife to get up so he would have the alibi that she was there and he was there. And then finally he goes to another lake and buries his body. And because of, changing tides and just changing everything over the course of 17 years, the body was so deep within this lake, this other lake, no one would have thought to look there because why would you look at another lake when the man was last seen at the lake everyone had been looking at? So I just don't think his body would have popped up.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's interesting. I vaguely remember this case, but I don't think I knew all of the sordid details. And it's really crazy that some of these cases truly seem like fiction. You cannot believe that people go through these acts in order to just selfishly get what they want. But I want to stick to just families of victims, but just switching gears, you recently interviewed Lauren Johansson's father. And Lauren Johansson, Jarrett and I briefly discussed this case. She was a young, beautiful girl that was murdered by her boyfriend right outside of Nashville, Tennessee. And her boyfriend truly should have never been out of jail. It was essentially a technicality, an error on the court, on the bail company, if you will. I mean, what was it like interviewing her father, especially when everything is so fresh?
Yeah, it was just a few weeks after Lauren's funeral, and the family was, still grieving. They'll be grieving forever, in shock, trying to process everything. But they feel like, they really needed to speak and get their story told because it's not okay what the justice system did to this family. Under no circumstances is it okay. And even the hearings that they're having now to figure out what went wrong and where, to call these things oversights, mistakes, the bail conditions that somehow didn't reach the bond company, according to the bond company. I don't think that it's enough to call something an oversight or a mistake when someone has been murdered. The court was clearly warned, without question. If he is released, he will finish what he started. And that is exactly what he's charged with doing. So I'm sorry, a bail condition that says you can't leave the state of Tennessee and you need an ankle monitor, really? So do you think that's an invisible fence that's going to keep someone from doing what it is they want to do? That's absurd. And I think we all sit back and think, oh, as long as they're wearing an ankle monitor, we're all safe. Yeah, you're not, because that ankle monitor does not prevent, does not stop a person from traveling. And at the very end, the ankle monitor battery died. His last known location was Biloxi, which was dangerously close to Lauren. So, uh, so much more has got to change. And I don't know whether you can hold anyone truly accountable here. You know, someone suggested to me that they should be convening a grand jury on this, that there should be criminal charges against everyone in this justice system in Nashville, Tennessee, that contributed to this. I don't think anybody has the stomach for that, but that's what it deserves.
Well, I always say too, Anna, when you're in this part of the business, we're juggling grenades. I mean, there are just, and that's not to excuse what happened. First of all, the compulsion on his part to kill her, and the fact that a couple of that time in jail did not cool him off. This was an unbelievable case. But when you look at the system, and I know people want to hold it accountable, I think that's a little bit of an overreach if they convene a grand jury. There were a lot of failings. There were several levels of failure in that particular system. But, the one thing about our system I think that is so fascinating is people don't understand that it's run by people. They're human beings. They have vulnerabilities. They're not perfect. And every case is so unique. One of the things, you and I were part of the presentation on Brian Kohlberger on the 2020 episode, and that aired some time ago. And there have been so many manifestations and changes in that particular case. What has your experience been? And I know you've covered it extensively and have been following it. What are your thoughts on the latest developments there, where there's now a change of venue and a new judge?
I can't say that I disagree. I think this case will be decided by the facts, and predominantly it has to be the forensic, both the digital and the DNA. I can't imagine it can be told any other way to a jury. Those are going to be, I think, the most compelling parts of this. So moving venues. I mean, didn't they come out? Didn't they say that the judge agreed to this because after polling everyone, they pretty much found that they couldn't find anybody there?
Well, that was part of it. The defense had presented a series of surveys that they conducted. So the judge, and they had a great judge. I'm only disappointed that he's off the case now, because he was really, you could watch him kind of labor over every decision. He just seemed like such a gentleman. I mean, I watched those hearings. I've been in front of hundreds of judges in my career. He seemed very gracious to the parties, very cognizant of just the scope of this thing. And I was like, oh, I know he's going to, and change venue, which, as you said, it was the right thing. I mean, why leave that particular issue out there? It was the right thing to do. And we can't ignore the fact that Kohlberger or anybody in his situation has the right to a fair trial and the presumption of innocence. And people have a tough time accepting that, in our system.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right there, Jared. But won't it all rest on the evidence? It will absolutely, whether that evidence is, I think presented in one jurisdiction or another. If the evidence is truly strong, then there should be no problem for the prosecution to get a conviction in this case if the evidence is indeed there and strong.
You're right. And I think it is. I mean, looking at this, Lauren and I have been covering this case for a while. I feel very good about what the prosecution has. I also think the defense is doing a good job at picking apart each of those pieces of evidence, but we don't live in a vacuum. You have to look at these things in the totality of the circumstances, as the lawyers say. And you can't just focus on A without A, B, C, and D. It's just too much. I think the prosecution can overwhelm the defense here with all of the evidence they have. And I'm looking forward to that trial and justice for those families, which is coming up, which I'm sure you're going to be all over.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very, very painful for that entire community, particularly for the families. There are a lot of emotions about this case. And still, I realize no one has to prove motive. And that's always hard for a lot of people to. It's not that understanding why changes anything, but you do want to know why. Why, if he did kill them, why did he target them? And what was it about them? And I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever get that answer because he's clearly, says he's not guilty and will be defending himself. So I don't think we'll ever get that. Why?
That's an important point, though, about people always say that you don't need to prove motive. It's like I see life in the courtroom and beyond as a story. I mean, people need to understand why. First of all, this was such a violent, brutal killing of 4 young, beautiful people. Is it so out of the ordinary for us to want to know why did this happen? How did these innocent young people get butchered by this person who virtually has no connection to them? So why, I always say, like, we don't live in the courtroom and neither do the jurors. They're going to want to know why, whether or not you have to prove it or not. And it's an important consideration that's always on their minds. And I'm sure there'll be some kind of an explanation. Some of the things that have come out was, number one, I think it was clear to him he was losing his position there, that the facade that he had built as a teacher's assistant, as a doctoral student, was starting to crumble. He was starting to have significant problems. And just prior to his jaunt from Washington to northeastern Pennsylvania, a letter was issued terminating him. So I think he knew things were trending downward in his life and he couldn't keep those demons at bay anymore.
But how do you then make the leap from that to murdering these 4? And then why? Why them? And this is the part I just don't get.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a cocktail of psychology, opportunity. His life was starting to fall apart, and he somehow found these young people and targeted them. And again, I don't know that there's an answer to that yet, but I agree. That's the next part of the question. It's like, okay, if he's acting crazy and his life's falling apart, how do we get to, Maddie, Ethan, and how do you get there? And the investigation is going to have to try to connect those dots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's where the doubt is going to come in. And I'm shocked over this case in the sense that Brian Kohlberger has a fan club. Whether we like it or not, there is a large group of people who think he is innocent and they fully support him. And this is one of the reasons. So it's pretty sick. I've never seen people, I guess, rally around a defendant like that, where everything.
Well, I have.
Well, Karen Reed doesn't count. Okay, I'm not talking about Karen Reed. Literally, is that what you're talking about, or
No, and personally, I've had it happen.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I mean to this degree and the crimes being this severe. But Anna, I want to ask you, because I am just fascinated by cases and trials that are from the 90s and early 2000s, like Scott Peterson and Lacey Peterson and the Menendez brothers, Jose and Kitty. All of a sudden, these trials are relevant again for different reasons. I personally feel like Scott Peterson is a disgusting human who deserves to rot in prison forever, but I have different views about the Menendez brothers. What do you make of all of this, of these 30-year-old crimes coming to light again, getting attention, and these people wanting new trials?
Well, everybody who is behind bars and convicted would like a new trial. It goes with the situation. So I can't say that I'm surprised about that. The only reason they're getting attention because they are really high profile cases. Scott Peterson with the Netflix series, but also with this move, this very, very limited move to retest some evidence from the crime scene and from Lacey. The judge has given his new attorneys a little window. It's tiny because they asked for a lot to be retested. So what is it? It's a piece of what I call gaffer's tape.
Yes, that was on her sweatpants.
Right.
I thought,
And that will be retested for DNA using current forensics. it's interesting. I mean, I could see why the judge would make that decision on that piece of evidence, because if someone had to tack it on her, right, physically, that
Mhm.
maybe in the process some DNA was left on there, and technology has changed so significantly since Lacey's murder. So, I mean, that's interesting. That's fascinating. And then you have him speaking from behind bars for yet another docuseries. So I think it's the docuseries bring a lot of attention, but really the only thing that I'm interested in as a crime reporter is, okay, he's got a little latitude here. The judge is sending some evidence to be retested. What, if anything, will this show?
Yeah, I don't think he changed much at all. He pretty much said the same thing in that documentary that he said 20 years ago, a little bit differently. I still think he's incredibly phony, and I will eat my words if the DNA results come back and, yeah, for whatever reason he's exonerated, but I just don't see that happening. I literally do not see that happening. I think that, God, I think his family is so delusional. I think that he is delusional, and I think that the Menendez brothers, however, that is a bit more complicated with the evidence that is resurfaced as of 2023. I feel like they should get a new trial. I actually do feel that way. I feel like so much has changed since 1990 to 1996, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but I do feel like with this letter and with Roy Rosella from Menudo coming forward saying that he also was assaulted by their father, and just the way the second trial played out, I felt like that just wasn't fair.
You know, I don't know. I got to tell you, that one is a puzzle to me. I would take Jared's lead on this one.
I, Here's what everyone ignores. To me, I would think what we know about sexual abuse and survivors today versus what we know in 1996. Does
Mhm.
anybody not know how to make a deal? Go to their lawyers and say, hey, let's work a plea out. The guys get 25 years, time served, and they're out. I'm like, and nobody ever talks about that. But
Yeah.
so I look at the Menendez case like this, that viewed through the lens in 2024, that defense and the sexual abuse survivor defense, whole different ball game now than where it was in 1996.
Yeah,
And the
agreed.
prosecution of P. Diddy and what's coming out about the music industry, do you think he invented that aspect of the music or entertainment industry? This has been going on for years. It's one of the worst kept secrets in Hollywood. Their father was a player in that world. This information's coming to light. To me, I think there's a small avenue to make a deal with Lyle and Eric Menendez, or to give serious consideration to that defense, which has really changed over the years.
But why would a prosecutor just go ahead and make a deal rather than forcing an issue? Because that is, well, first of all, the prosecutor would, it's that's a tough one, right? That's a tough public sell, and most prosecutors are elected.
Well, so here's why it may make sense. A prosecutor can say these young men were extremely young when this happened. They've served 25 plus years in prison. We have reviewed this defense. Rather than tie our entire operation up in an extended, costly trial, we're accepting that they're responsible. They've admitted what they've done, but this could very well have been the result of abuse suffered at the hands of their father. That's why it may make sense. And I'm not lobbying for it, but I'm saying it's in the offing here when you hear the compelling stories of what's coming out about these survivors of sexual abuse. I just see it as a maybe as an off ramp to a retrial here.
Do you think, though, that one of the problems with the Menendez brothers is, and sadly, whether you are privileged or not, you can be horrifically abused for your life. And I'm not discounting that. But what are the optics here of perhaps letting two rich brothers out versus many, many, many children, young adults who have killed their parents for the same reason, and they don't get the get out of jail card?
Well,
Well,
and again, sorry, if
no, I
there's the political component, there's the human component, but at the same time, and I hear your question. But there's also this case by case situation where you say, these two defendants, take money out of the equation. If these guys had no money and they did this, and it was the result of being abused, and I don't know that it is. I haven't looked at the documentation, but my opinion is there is some understanding. Like what's going on in Philly and some other places, people literally get away with stuff like you wouldn't believe, or light sentences. People understand that times have changed, and it's not like they walked on this thing either. So I don't know. I think the public would be a little bit more accepting of some kind of an arrangement here, and not attribute it to their money, because they did face the music here.
Yeah, I think it should be just known that what was going on in LA during that time of the second trial played a huge part. LA could not let them walk. They could not make a plea. They just lost the OJ trial. Los Angeles was up in arms after the 4 officers that beat the hell out of Rodney King were acquitted. They needed a conviction for the second trial. They weren't about to let anything slip through the cracks, which is why, in my opinion, the second trial was completely unjust, because they weren't allowed to use their original defense. They weren't allowed to have half of the witness testify on their behalf. And I feel like a plea or it just wasn't on the table, because number one, the first trial, they thought, no way are we going to get convicted. They're going to understand. Maybe we'll get manslaughter, but they are going to hear what we went through. And then second trial, that again is where LA is like, hell no plea. We need a win, and we're going to get these guys. That's my opinion. And that's pretty much why, or one of the reasons I think that, they should be granted something here, but who knows? I'm not a lawyer or a judge. So but Anna, this was wonderful. We really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us. We're going to link out all of your shows in the episode notes, your website. You're doing amazing work, and we just look forward to seeing everything that you continue to do. So thank you for joining.
Could you tell us in your own words where your show is, where it could be found for the millions that are watching it? If there are some people out there, I don't know who they are, that aren't. So if you could just direct us where we can find you.
Well, here's the thing. It's on a different time in each different city. So it's a little bit of a patchwork. So it's not as easy for me to answer. We're primarily on Fox stations, but not just. So I think the easiest answer for everyone is if you go to our website at truecrimenews.com, and there we have a station locator. It will give you search by your city, and then it will tell you the TV stations that carry it and at what time. I wish that it were an easier answer, and I thank you for the chance, but that's the most clarity I can give you.
Yeah,
well, all listeners and viewers are very smart. They'll find you. Don't worry.
And again, I have all of that in the episode notes, so everybody can easily click on it and find where their market is. So, Ana Garcia, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ana.
Happening, you're trying to figure out ultimately what is
It's still a mystery as to why it took them